be fine.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad he had the car crash. We were 10 years into our marriage, and by that time, we had 3 beautiful children. I'm glad he had the car crash. That resulted in a brain scan which showed atrophy, and then was sent for further tests. And after going to about 5 different consultants for second opinion and third opinion and fourth opinion, I entered the home of a consultant with my husband, and his words were, "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Oberoi, but he's terminal." And I said, "Dr. J, aren't you terminal?" And he turned round to me and said, "You're in shock, Mrs. Oberoi." And I burst into tears. And he said, "That's the beginning of your tears." I remember holding my husband's hand, walking along the pathway of his beautiful home and going back into my car. And I put the windscreen wipers on. They weren't doing any good. They couldn't wipe my tears away. Sorry, I just need to collect my thoughts. And I've numbered my pages wrong on here. It actually I was so pleased that he'd had the car crash. It made sense, the depression, the lethargy, the body movements that he'd been having for the last few years. I could make no sense of them. I was glad he had the car crash because no longer was he allowed to drive, and no longer was I so scared to have the children in the car with him driving. And my daughter over there is laughing and remembering this. So I'm glad. I now fast forward to 2002. And my husband was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, a genetic illness. And one of the symptoms was that he couldn't swallow very well towards the end. But he loved, like my daughter, Mars bars. So on this particular day, he decided to open the fridge in the home where he was and decided to take a bite into it. And he choked. He choked and ended up in hospital with a heart attack. And after the heart attack, he had a stroke. We're now on the 10th of October in the hospital, and the nurses are saying it won't be long. Has everybody been to see him? We'd prepared his room as though it was heaven on earth. We'd got his best perfume. We'd got his incense sticks. We'd got his candles. We'd got his best PJs. And we'd got his yellow flowers. I just hope that somebody takes that care when I die. The nurse came in. This is now the 14th of October. He'd been given a few hours on the 10th, but he was a stubborn old man. That's what got him through, just like my daughter. The nurse came in and she opened one of the small windows. And I said to her, why have you done that? Because it was quite cold, it was October. And she didn't say anything but left the room. So my 3 children and me were by his bedside from the 10th of October. And we were around 9 o'clock in the evening on the 14th of October now. And Sheenam, my daughter, every time she touched him, he was ready to leave his breath, but every time she touched him, his breath went back to normal. And I began to really see this for about half an hour. I could see his struggle, but I could also witness what Sheenam was doing every time she touched him. So I asked for the nurse to ask her to take the 3 children out of the room so that I could spend some special time with their daddy. I whispered into his ear, "Thank you. I thank you for our 3 beautiful children. And I promise to look after them." I knew he was hearing me. There was a flicker on his right eye. The nurse had said that the hearing is the last thing to go. I knew he heard those words. He knew that I loved him. He knew that his children loved him. I then turned my chair and I literally turned my back on him. I turned my back on him because it was about the detachment, about trying to detach myself from him. And again, I uttered those words to him and said, "I love you and I release you." Within 3 minutes of me saying that, his breath began to change again, and I could see that he was going to be leaving his mortal body and transforming into the universal power. I shouted to the nurse, please come, bring the children in, quick." And we'd talked about it. And we'd said, we will all have our hands round his chest and we will pray. And we did. And then his last left him. And that split second, there was a cone shape leave his mouth and go out of that window that the nurse had opened 4 days ago. I remember standing there, and I can still vividly feel those emotions. I can still feel what I said was, "Did you hear that? Did you see that? Did you see that?" I said to the nurse. It actually didn't matter whether she had seen it or not. What mattered was what she said to me. She said, "Mrs. Oberoi, that's a very special moment. You're a very special family. Not many people get the opportunity to witness that." And then Sheenam, my daughter, touched the body where the soul no longer was living. And she said, Thank you, Daddy. I'm no longer afraid of dying. Those words, thank you, Daddy, I'm no longer afraid of dying, still resonate with me, deep within my soul. Fast forward to his funeral. And on the morning of the funeral, Madam here decides to go for a coffee with her friends when her dad's coffin is at home. So it took me all of my energy to keep calm, not say anything to her when she returned, and just carried on. Until a few days later, when I was seething with anger and how dare you have done that on your dad's day of the funeral, and you'd come and went off with your friends for a coffee. How dare you? I said, what possessed you to do that? And she said, I'd gone for my last appointment to check if I've got the disease. My whole world turned upside down. I hugged her, and I was so sorry for what I had said to her and how angry I'd been at her. But I wasn't to know. I had no idea. I had no idea what this young lady was going through, going for genetic testing, going for blood tests, going for counselling, and I had no idea. I was so wrapped up with looking after my ill husband. Sheenam's dad, my husband, left a difference. Left a difference that only he could make. Only he could have said those words to my daughter. Daddy, I'm no longer afraid of dying. But never in a million years did I imagine that that's what he was preparing her for, was that a few days after his funeral that she'd been diagnosed with juvenile Huntington's disease, a much crueler form of Huntington's with a much shorter lifespan. I'd been operating on autopilot ever since my husband was ill. I was trying to manage 3 young children. I was trying to hold down a responsible job. My own emotions, they were really held down. I'd created a brick wall around me. I was brittle, I was abrasive. I'd lost touch, I'd disconnected. I disconnected with myself, with the world, with the people around me. I remember going to the chiropractor because I'd got such a bad back. And I said to the chiropractor, what can I do to get myself better? And he says, Paramjit, just be. And I said, be what? Be what? He says, Paramjit, just be. I was so far removed from who I was that I didn't understand what being was. I was a human doing, not a human being. I'd lost touch. I'd unplugged myself. I'd unplugged myself, and it reminded me of the time when my dear father said to me, now, Paramjit, when you plug the kettle, you have to plug it in and switch it on, don't you? And I said, yes. And he says, but do you know how that kettle boils? What is the source of that energy that comes through that electric wire? It's that same universal essence. We have different names that we give to it. We might call it power. We might call it essence. We might call it God. We might call it spirituality. We might give it whatever name. It's like all these various companies that provide us with electricity. It doesn't change the source of the electricity. It's just different names that are given to that source. It was the 25th of May, many years ago, soon after my husband passed away, that I got a jolt out of bed, pushed me, which said, get up a piece of paper and write. And I wrote 12 poems. Well, actually, I didn't. I didn't write them at all. They came through me. And even now, when I think of that, this arm, I can still feel how painful this arm was with me writing so quickly and doing that. I can still feel that now. But my connection for the pen to the paper, from my head to my heart, and from connecting again with human beings, was what allowed me to be a bit softer. It allowed me to feel again. I'd lost feeling. I'd blocked my feelings, but my body was taking account. Every single cell in my body was taking account. Let me now fast forward you to Sheenam's 19th birthday coming up. That was then. And every year since Sheenam was diagnosed, I'd say to her, Sheenam, what wish do you want? What should we do? What's your bucket list? So we tried to sort those out. We went to Australia, we swam with the dolphins, we went to California to look at the research that was going on. And that particular incident there in California, it reminds me, we were at one of the labs where they were doing some research into Huntington's disease. And one of the researchers came up after they'd shown us the experiments they were doing with the rats. And he said to me, I now know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've only been experimenting on rats. I've never seen a person with juvenile Huntington's disease. He emailed me a week later and said, thank you. Sheenam made a difference. She made the difference only Sheenam could make. Because he said, I now go into my research lab an hour earlier every day, and I'm more and more determined to make this happen because I've seen a person, a human being with this disease, and I want to find a cure. So Sheenam made the difference that Sheenam could make. I remember my father used to say to me when I was about 8 years old, Paramjit, death is perched on your right shoulder. And I used to laugh at him. Dad, I can't see that. I can't see that. Death is a breath away from us. It's our final breath. We all come into this world. We're all very unique. We're actually 1 in a million. It's interesting because the card I got related to that as well today, so thank you. We're all 1 in a million. We're unique. And it's from 1 sperm and 1 egg and sexual energy to create that. And I wonder whether my dad at that time was preparing me to embrace death, to face death, to look at death straight on. Because when, from my experience, we accept our mortal life here, and that we will transcend, that we will all die. You will die. I will die. We don't know where, we don't know when, and we don't know how, but we will all die. So my dad was preparing me for what was happening with my husband and then with my daughter. So let's go back to Sheenam and her wishes. So on her 19th birthday, around her 19th birthday, I said to her, Sheenam, come on, what's your wish? And she says, Mum, I'm not telling you. I said, go on, I'm your mum. I can make whatever you want come true. She says, Mum, you can't make this come true. And I said, what is it? Go on, I'm your mum. I'll try everything to make it happen for you. And she says, Mum, this is impossible. I said, Sheenam, I've brought you up telling you that nothing is impossible. The word itself says I'm possible. So don't mess with me. Tell me. And she says, you can't make it happen, but I'll tell you anyway. I want to get married and I want a baby. I was lost for words. I had no words. I didn't know how to console her. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how anything I could say could make her feel better. And I tuned in. I plugged in. I plugged into source. I plugged into the universal power, the universal essence, and asked for help. I let go and let God, whatever we want to call God. And there was a flicker of something coming to me. And that flicker was charity, charity. Sheenam, why don't we set up a charity? Well, in order for us to be 1 in a million, to be born on this earth, it needs sexual energy. And energy is energy. It's the same source that we plug in. It's energy. How do we transmute that sexual energy into something else? We could create a charity. So I just dropped the seeds and left it. Those pin dropped silence, and I thought, I bet she's thinking, how stupid of Mum to be saying this. I want a baby, and what she's saying to me is set up a charity. 10 minutes later, she came up to me and said, Mum, okay, let's do it then. And I said to her, great. And she said, but there are 2 conditions. By that time, I couldn't be bothered if there were 1 million conditions because she had given so much up. I said, come on, what are the 2 conditions? And she said, the first one is that you look after the charity as well as you look after your grandson, and that you'll love him forever. The second was that the money that we raise from charity will only be used by fun for the children that have got juvenile Huntington's disease, because Sheenam's such a fun-loving daughter. Sorry, Sheen, I'm calling you child, but you'll always be my child. So her wish was, by her 30th birthday, was to raise £10,000 for the 100 young people. It's a very rare disease, only 100 young people who have got this disease in the UK. So we gave birth to Sheenam's wish. And that has kept us going, that's kept us alive, that's kept us motivated, and that's kept us humbled by the amazing connections we've made, the amazing people that have supported us. I was sitting the other day, and you might not be able to see it, but I actually began to pencil in the dots, the differences that people had made to our lives. Each one of those represent a difference that would not have been made if Sheenam and my husband hadn't been in my life, that I'd not been married to my husband and hadn't produced beautiful Sheenam. These connections would not have been made, and these people would not have made a difference in our lives, and maybe we made some difference in theirs as well. I thank these two people. It's because of these two people that I stand before you today. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for these two people. I wouldn't have this story. I wouldn't have a beautiful friend, Yasmin, who I met at a writing group, who had seen one of the poems that I'd written, and she wanted to seek me out. And Yasmin actually looked after me and bought my shopping for me all the way through COVID when I was in isolation. And Dave, a very special man who's Sheenam's carer, has just been amazing. I would never have met these people. I would never have become a board member of Carers UK. I would never have been a non-executive director for Derby Primary Care Trust. I would never have got a chapter written in this book, Women of Spirit, about our experiences. None of that would be possible. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I stand before you today now as an accredited end-of-life planner. What led me to this was these two. I want to make sure that my affairs are in order before I die. I want to make sure that my children don't go through any more grief than they have already gone through when I die. Well, where did Mum put that paper? Who do we contact? We can't find the insurance paper to this. Where on earth did she put a will? I didn't and don't want my children to go through that. So I trained as an end-of-life planning facilitator. And I have a huge aversion to going to funerals for one reason. And that one reason is because when I go to funerals and I hear people saying all these lovely things about people, but those people may never have heard those things. How important is it for us to say, I love you? How important is it to say, thank you for your kindness? How important is it for us to say, you've made a difference in my life? What I'd like to do is to throw a challenge out to you. I'd like you to think about, what is the difference? The difference that only you can make. I want you to live your legacy. I want you to leave a legacy. But most of all, I want you to hear your legacy. Thank you.